Hi friends, my name is Dasha and today I'm going to be doing a review of The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi. This book was going around on BookTube last year, but I only read it in June, so I thought, better late than never. I have a lot of thoughts about this book, which is why I want to film a full review on it to kind of work through all my feelings, I guess. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. There are some things I really loved about this book and really hated. So to sort out my feelings, I use the Cawpile system, which is characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue, logic, and enjoyment. It is something I discovered through G from Book Roast, and it kind of just helps you rate your books on each of those things from 1 to 10, and it gives you an overall star rating at the end. And it's just a lot easier if you kind of don't know where to stand, and I actually really needed it for this book. To begin, this story is essentially a heist story. It's set in 1890s Paris in a world that involves a magic system called forging. Forging is essentially an affinity that some people have either for the mind or the matter, so matter is like physical things that can be manipulated. And what happens in this world is there are artifacts that have been forged over the years, over the centuries, that have been taken from their original civilizations and cultures and sold across the world. And so this group of teens working together go to these auctions and buy back these artifacts or steal them, and they kind of try to return them to their rightful owners and really want to focus on not letting these artifacts just stay in the hands of wealthy people. There's underground societies, there is a lot of whimsy and magic, there is a fantastic friend group, and there is a heist, and that is all I will say for the synopsis. So the first thing I want to touch on is the characters. In the Cawpile scale, I gave this a 8 out of 10. I thought the characters were phenomenal. I love the fact that it was this like ragtag group of friends that came together through different circumstances. I thought that the friend group was actually really well balanced. I thought that everyone had a place, everyone had a role, all the interactions and all the dialogue was so well done. There's just, there's some tropes that do come back since it is a young adult book, but I thought that they were all very believable, they were very well fleshed out, and it didn't feel like the reincarnation of characters we've seen again. You also get to follow almost everyone's point of view, which is really nice in terms of getting backstory, in terms of getting different voice and perspective on what's happening, and getting to see the characters' relationships with one another. I thought everything to do with the characters I thought was honestly pretty well done. The atmosphere, I gave 9 out of 10. It was just the aesthetics of this book. So it's set in Paris, which I am completely biased towards. I find that city just has such a vibe to it. I sound disgusting, but it does. I feel like the city just is very special, and I always connect to it even if it's through writing. And on top of that, Roshani plucked some fantasy and dropped it into 1890s Paris, and it was opulent, it was decadent, it was so fantastical in a way that really worked. I felt like the fantasy blended very seamlessly with the Parisian setting, and it didn't kind of detract from the historical setting. I thought it worked just so well. The writing, unfortunately, I gave the writing a 4 out of 10. The style of writing that Roshani has lends itself very well to building up atmosphere and building scenery. The hotel that they live in is very whimsical in itself, and they spend a lot of time there, and the gardens that are there that are described are just so breathtaking. And one of the parties that they went to of one of the secret societies was just so opulent, and everything worked. But then when Roshani wrote action scenes, I find myself having to go back and reread paragraphs. I already don't do very well with action scenes, so this might be a complete bias on my part. I find I have a hard time following along with action scenes. I don't imagine them as well as I do settings or characters. But I just found that the style of writing did not lend itself well to action scenes, regardless of how I perceive action. And I felt like it was just very frustrating to have to backpedal all the time. So I had to kind of lower my rating for that. I also feel like for the themes that she was trying to portray, specifically anti-colonialism, were not as strong as she probably wanted them to be, but I will admit that I was having a hard time with following along, so I might have not been paying attention to things like themes as well as I probably could have. But it's just something I wanted to throw in there because I found for me, it was one of the selling points that people were using for this book, and it just didn't quite come across that way to me. It did a little bit, obviously. I'm not saying like that idea wasn't there at all. It just wasn't as strong as I would have hoped. And next up is the plot, and I want to say that the plot is, you know, a typical heist story, the planning, and then the actual heist, and obviously because this is a series, something goes wrong. But like it balanced certain elements like the research and discussion and planning with the action scenes, and it didn't feel like it dragged at any point, and the plot felt like it was always moving and it was clear, you know, so I can't hate on it for that. Intrigue got a slightly lower score for me, it was about a 6 out of 10. Knowing that it's a YA heist fantasy obviously kind of makes you know how it's gonna go more or less, and you know that because there is a sequel and it might be a full series, you kind of know what direction it's heading in. But because the characters and the atmosphere were very enjoyable, it kept me wanting to read, fair enough, and there was a very good balance in terms of, like I mentioned, in terms of like the planning and the action and like research and action, and I found that there was no pacing issues, you know, anytime there was a backstory, it never really detracted. It felt like it flowed very well, which I appreciated because you weren't stuck wondering like, okay, I don't really care about this, like there's no need for this, can I just get back to the story? It worked very well. So the intrigue, like I wanted to keep reading. The logic also got a fairly low score for me, 5 out of 10. So logic for me, I guess I'll preface by saying this, logic for me usually relates to the magic system. I had some issues. I understand that it was explained. There was a little infodome section, which I quite enjoyed. However, when it came to the practical application of the magic system, I felt like it was entirely too open-ended. And this might be completely a preference thing, I'll kind of admit that. But it felt like it was just so open-ended that the characters had no barriers to overcome. Everyone was just very capable of basically making anything they wanted, and it just felt like I would have preferred trying to see the characters deal with some kind of blockages, you know? It seemed like everything was possible, and I kind of like there to be limitations. I feel like it's not very plausible to say that you can literally build anything with this forging. So that might be a preference thing, I'll completely acknowledge that. It was written, in terms of like the initial description, it was written into the story, and like it made, from what I can remember, it made a fair amount of sense. It just, when it came to the application, the logic seemed faulty because it seemed like absolutely anything was possible, and that just doesn't seem right to me. But again, nitpicky, possibly opinionated, that's fine. The final thing is enjoyment. I gave this a 7 out of 10 for enjoyment. I still really enjoyed it. The characters, the atmosphere, you know, the wanting to keep reading. There was no issues in terms of like plot and pacing, like I said. The plot was familiar, but that doesn't make it bad. It just makes it, you know, like you can fall back into it and you know where it's headed, and it's kind of familiar and comforting in that way. And it was well executed. I think the plot, the intrigue, the characters, the atmosphere is super well executed. Just some nitpicky things about the writing style and the magic system, and those are my major gripes with it. So all of that compiled gave about a 3.5, 3.75 stars. Like, this book was still fairly solid. I felt like there was a lot of things to say about it. I would say the big themes of this book are obviously anti-colonialism, like I mentioned, but I also felt like there was very interesting themes of, you know, finding your family. There was a very nice found family, and all these people kind of depended on one another and trusted one another, and it felt very comfortable. There's nothing I hate more than reading a friend group that's not believable, but in this book I felt like it was just very believable. Everyone had a role to play and it was great. And the other major theme I would say actually that I didn't expect was overcoming trauma. So a lot of the people had dealt with their own kinds of trauma, and they kind of had to deal with it and help each other deal with it in order to function better as a group, and I really appreciated that. I thought it was fairly well written, and everyone kind of dealt with it a little bit differently, and you kind of get to see them develop and still continue to deal with it. So finally, I would recommend this book. I would recommend it to anyone who loves a very opulent and decadent setting. Think Night Circus when it comes to the actual atmosphere of the place and how real and tangible the circus feels. That's how Paris feels for me in this book. So I thought that part was really well done. And I would also recommend it to anyone who's looking for like that found family trope. You really feel like these characters are friends. You really grow to love them a lot. And obviously, you know, if you go into this, I'm sure you're aware, you know, you kind of have to get over the fact that it's a plot that we've kind of seen before. It's a writing style that's maybe not the easiest, but I do really recommend it if you're looking for, again, like great atmosphere, found family. If the setting interests you at all, I'd say go for it. I did not hate this book. I thought it was pretty solid. I just had a few things I kind of wanted to like get off my chest about this. And overall, it's just like, it was pretty solid. And I'm probably going to read the sequel. I think I'm very interested to see how these characters continue to develop and what happens to them. It could either be super sweet and super fun, or it could rip my heart right out of my chest and make me want to die. Who knows? But yeah, I think that wraps up all the thoughts I have on the Gilded Wolves. And in the comments, you can always let me know what you thought of this book. And if you're interested, you can follow me on my socials, hit me up there. I'm always happy to talk. And other than that, I'll see you guys next time.